In the midst of tears, I hid from him, and under running laughter. Up twisted hopes I sped, and shot precipitated, adown titanic glooms of chasmed fears, from those strong feet that followed after. But with unhurrying chase and unperturbed pace, deliberate speed, majestic instancy, they beat, and a voice beat, more instant than the feet. All things betray thee, who betrayest me. I think this poem by Francis Thompson is very stunning. Especially to me, it is very striking. Thompson writes about the human heart running away from God while God pursues relentlessly. Now let's be honest, how many of us have tried to avoid a truth that we knew deep down we couldn't escape from? Sometimes it is our conscience, sometimes it is our curiosity, and sometimes even the internet, all chasing us like a hound of heaven. The Christian story, and I want to start off by saying, is very special. It is special for the reason that it is not merely humanity that searches for God, but that God relentlessly, as Francis Thompson says, searches for humanity. Religion is man trying to reach God, but Christianity and Christ is God knocking on the doors of your heart. And I have this image, the light of the world, painted by William Holman Hunt. And if you look closely, I want you to look at this image for a little bit, the little details that you can notice. At first, this painting shows a man quietly standing at a door. But this is not just any other man. He is Christ, who stands outside quietly, holding a lantern in his left hand. He's not forcing the door open. And then you notice something very unusual. If you look in clearly, the door has no handle on the outside. It can only be opened from inside. And this door is not just any other door. It is painted and it represents our own hearts. Hunt painted this as a symbol of the human soul. Christ is not entering by force. He waits to be invited. The light he carries is not just a lantern, but it represents guidance, hope, and courage. He brings the light so he can show you and I the way today. And maybe, and just maybe, the most powerful part of this painting is this. He is not looking at the door, he is looking at you and I today. He knocks, but you must open. As he writes in The Hound of Heaven, Francis Thompson, even when we flee, Christ pursues us with deliberate speed and majestic instancy. Apologetics, then, is part of helping people recognize the person who is already pursuing them. We may wrestle, we may wander intellectually, physically, and spiritually, but all roads lead to the cross eventually. The Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting. It has been found difficult and left untried. What if many people reject Christianity today, not because it is false, but because it has never been properly explained to them? And that is where apologetics aligns with evangelism that you and I are ought to do today. How many of us, by a show of hands, have wrestled with questions about God, faith, or the Bible that felt unsolvable? I have too, and I still do. And well, let's set the stage. Christians today face a very busy world. If you look at the next part of your notes, the contemporary context of Christian life, a few of the challenges that we face today include biblical illiteracy. Many people compartmentalize their faith like it's a Netflix series for Sundays only. The 21st century church faces a minimum of 21 such challenges. Many more, which I haven't actually cited here, will be a topic for our future discussions. such as gender and sexuality, anti-intellectualism, hyper-intellectualism, social media, church consumerism, the prosperity gospel, and the list goes on. But with these challenges lie opportunities. A quote goes by saying, "A smart man is quick to find challenges in his opportunities, but a wise man is much quicker to find opportunities in every challenge." And with all of these challenges, the 21 different challenges, all of which are not listed on this slide, comes 21 different opportunities. Probably you're here at this table to listen and be able to share the gospel among your peers, among your family members, among people you meet by the roadsides. There was this one time I was talking to a bunch of fellow believers at the SCE who were actually Muslim folks, and I was telling them about the Bible. And I think to myself that, well, I don't really think I would be empowered to be able to say all these things and defend my faith if I wouldn't have studied apologetics. And if we narrow all of these down into just 3 fundamental segments, they can be narrowed down to relativism, pluralism, and secularism. Broadly, these 3 trends shape the contemporary attitudes towards Christianity. I want you to take a moment and read the notes that are there on your handouts: relativism, pluralism, and secularism. Good to go. So the way that I would like to narrow it down further from the handouts is relativism, pluralism, secularism. All truth is relative. All beliefs are valid simultaneously. And faith is fine, but keep it private. The first time I actually heard of these 3 terms was about 2 years back when I was in my first apologetics class. It dates back to the 2nd of April, just a few days from now. And when I was studying this, I was very doubtful in my mind. But the way that I could understand and comprehend this is, let's talk about relativism. When we talk about relativism, everything is relative. What is true for you may not be true for me. Roel, what do you think the truth is? Or John, do you think truth exists?
Yes. Absolutely.
Or Abhinav, why do you think there is truth? Or things like that. Well, your truth is my truth, your truth is your truth, and my truth is mine. Relativists can't even agree on the weather outside. The Greek philosopher Protagoras is considered as the initiator of relativism. He famously said something that all of you might know: man is the measure of all things. But this creates a self-contradiction. Relativism says all truth is relative. If the statement is absolutely true, then not all truths are relative, because this is absolutely true. And it says that all truths are relative. And if it is relative, then people who believe in absolute truth are also correct. I want you to soak in the logic for a little minute. If this statement above, that all truth is relative, is absolutely correct, then not all truths are relative. Not all truths but one, because one is being shown as being absolutely true. I hope you understand that. If you don't, well, we can still go over it once again. But it is almost as if it is saying that there are people who would believe that murder and slavery are not objectively wrong, but it is only subjectively wrong. Because what is true for you may not be true for somebody else. If we look into pluralism, pluralism believes that all different values and beliefs are valid simultaneously. Since pluralism believes that all different beliefs and values are true, then even beliefs that reject pluralism ought to be true. You get the idea. This is also creating self-contradiction. Relativism is basically people arguing whether it is currently snowing or raining, whereas pluralism is people saying it is snowing and raining with a hint of sunshine, both of which are not actually true. Lastly, secularism. Secularists say, keep religion out of politics, but politicians will still pray for votes to come in. We really aren't secular as a society. Oaths are taken on religious books, laws and constitutions are enacted keeping religious beliefs in mind, and even when you walk out of this room after this apologetic session today and say, God bless America, you aren't being secular. In the midst of all this, we look at the Great Commission, the Christian mandate for mission, which Jesus says in Matthew 28, verses 18 to 20. Pastor Henry, can you please read this?
The Christian mandate, therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen. In the midst of all of these challenges, Jesus' command still stands, the Great Commission. We are called to share an absolute truth with people who believe that what is true for you may not be true for them. An exclusive message to the people who believe that everything is true at the same time, and a supernatural view to the people who believe in a naturalistic culture. Diving deeper into apologetics, well, I will just hold that on for now. The meaning and scope of apologetics, we will reach there definitely. What is apologetics? The first time I heard this word, I thought Christians are so nice they even apologize for Christianity. But no, my dear brothers and sisters, it isn't apologizing for something. Apologetics comes from the Greek word apologia, meaning a formal defense. In common Greek, apologia refers to the speech that an accused person delivered in a courtroom, rejecting the charges that were filed against him or her. The apologists of the 2nd century chose this term because they wanted to show that the charges filed against the Christians were unjustified and that the truths of their faith could be described and defended. The accusation from the prosecution was called the categoria in Greek, and the reply, which was the defense, was called apologia. In modern terms, apologetics. We don't just have apologetics for Christians. There is Muslim apologetics. There is Orthodox belief apologetics. There is apologetics for all different worldviews. And it'll get very interesting because these apologetics that every different worldview has is going to collide with another at some form or another as we study about it. And that is where all the difference between the different worldviews will actually come in. So J.P. Moreland has this quote, which is there on your notes, and it says, apologetics can be defined as the New Testament ministry which seeks to provide rational grounds for believing Christianity in whole or in part, and to respond to objections raised against Christianity in whole or in part. And when we talk about this, apologists typically engage in their work in two complementary ways. We have negative apologetics and we have positive apologetics. Negative apologetics is usually apologetics that focuses on responding to criticisms or objections against Christianity. For instance, if people from different worldviews say that the Trinity is not correct because I don't believe it is true, or I don't believe in the resurrection, you are essentially defending it, and that is negative apologetics. But if you are presenting constructive arguments and evidence that support the truth of the Christian faith using things like biochemistry, using physics, using the nature, using creation as an example, that is positive apologetics. And both of these ways are essential when apologists are actually carrying out their work. And you and I don't need to be a master of all of this content. If we are evangelizing to different people, we already are apologists at heart. It just matters how much knowledge you have that you too can share to somebody else. Not saying that I know everything myself. I am still learning. And as a matter of fact, as I was making these notes, I was still learning myself. And I said, well, I still need to go over these things because I've probably lost touch of these couple of things. But this is where wisdom also comes in. You can have all the knowledge in the world, and then you need to be wise, and you need to ask for God's wisdom on how you apply this in your lives. Okay. Alistair McGrath says that, simply put, apologetics aims to give intellectual integrity and depth to evangelism, ensuring that faith remains rooted in the head as well as in the heart. when we look at apologetics, how apologetics is central to our mission, I want to start by the first one, apologetics and the Bible. The Bible models apologetics. Paul often reasons with Jews and Gentiles. Peter said, always be ready to give a defense for the hope in you. And Jesus says to love God with all our minds. Romans 12 verse 2 says, it calls unto us to renew our minds, because faith isn't just about the heart, but it is also about the head. That is why I pray for wisdom, and this morning still double check my sermon notes. If we skip the intellectual side of faith, people might think Christianity is just superstition. But apologetics keeps the gospel credible and compelling. Faith isn't about feeling something or trusting something blindly. I have a lot of people whom I meet and I ask them, why are you Christian? What happened to you? And they simply say, I was born into a Christian family. And I take a moment to soak that in. And I think to myself that you are not a Christian because you were born into it. Skepticism is part of my DNA. He was an atheist in high school, and the concepts of an all-loving, all-knowing, all-powerful God were so absurd to him that it never warranted his consideration. He believed that God didn't create people, but rather people created gods out of their fear of death and desire to live forever in a utopia called heaven. He married an agnostic woman by the name of Leslie, and several years later, she comes up to him with the worst possible news he could ever get. I have become a Christian. He said this, and I quote him as he says, she'll end up as an irrational, holy roller who ends up serving all her time the poor in a soup kitchen. So he even considered divorcing his wife Leslie.
Wow.
But during the ensuing months, he began to see positive changes in her character and values. He said the transformation was so winsome and attractive that he felt compelled to go to church. The sermon didn't change him as an atheist in one day, but it moved a seed inside his heart. He started evaluating Christianity through every perspective possible. And this is what we ought to do as believers today. Not change people, not question their faith, but rather move a seed inside their heart. He said that he was stunned to find that Christianity's factual foundation was a lot firmer than he once believed. He believed he could debunk Christianity in just a couple of months, but those couple of months took him to scrutinizing Christianity for 2 years. Much of his investigation focused on science, whose more recent discoveries have only further cemented the conclusions that he drew in his studies. For instance, cosmologists now argue that the universe and time itself came into existence at some point in the finite past. This logic is inexorable. It is also called the Kalam cosmological argument. It says simply, everything that begins So the Kalam cosmological theory, this foundation, this argument, it actually states something which is used often in debates. If point A tells you something that is true, and if point B is based on that truth, then point B is also true. When we look closely at this, well, it says whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. This is called the Kalam cosmological argument. And it is actually called so because the word Kalam in Arabic actually means that it has been given a great thought. It means speech or discussion in Arabic, and it is something that you really ponder upon. And the core premises is this: everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. This is almost using maths to say if A is equal to B and B is equal to C, then C is also equal to A. It was first talked about by Thomas Aquinas when he spoke about the 5 ways. And ultimately it says, the culmination of this is that it makes sense that the creator who created the universe is immaterial, is timeless, is powerful, and is intelligent. When this man, who is the editor of the Chicago Tribune back in '81, he read about this, he said that this holds true. He found out that a lot of things that physicists have discovered over the last 50 years, the many laws and constants of the universe, such as the force of gravity, the cosmological constant, they are finely tuned to such incomprehensible precision in order for life to exist. We are at the perfect distance from the sun to receive sunlight, and not too close also that we burn by the rays of the sun. This exactitude is so incredible that it defies the explanation of mere chance. And well, if we look at the Kalam cosmological argument, which talks about different things, and ultimately it also proves how Big Bang came into existence, as scientists allude to it. Well, from the Bible, if we look at this and we connect it, we understand by the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and the stars by the word of his mouth. In Genesis, when God says, "Let there be light," he is making creation. It is being created, and that is being proven. Later on, when this man found out that the existence of biological information in DNA also points to a creator. Each of our cells contains the precise assembly instructions for every protein out of which our bodies are made, all spelled out in a 4-letter chemical alphabet, ATGC. Nature can produce patterns, but whenever we see information, whether it is in a book or it is in a computer program, we know that there is intelligence behind it. If we look at a car that is outside, or if we drive a car, we know that there is a creator of the car. The car did not simply come into existence out of nothing. This editor said, to his great astonishment, he was convinced by the evidence that science supports the belief in a creator who looks suspiciously like the God of the Bible. There is much more he said in his story, but in the climax of the story, this editor, anybody knows the name? Lee Strobel, turned to Christianity. The DNA, he once said, brimmed with skepticism, today points to God's unfathomable realism. His most famous book, The Case for Christ, also cites his investigations. And as you refer to these notes are also so that you can go back home and ponder upon all of these verses, so you can have a look and you can read these things by yourself and connect it to what we actually speak about today. When we look at apologetics and the community of believers, so far we've seen how apologetics works in our own minds, loving God with our heads as well as our hearts. But here's the catch. Apologetics isn't a solo sport. You don't simply lock yourself in a room with a stack of books and become an expert overnight. That's more like my cousin saying he will be running a marathon by locking himself in a room watching YouTube videos and binging on pizzas. That is not effective. The Bible makes it clear that we are in this together. Acts chapter 1 verse 8 says, "You will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and to the ends of the earth you will be my witnesses." Not you alone or your iPhone or your Bible app, but you're meant to be part of a community, reasoning, learning, and yes, sometimes debating with each other. If we talk about Peter's story in Acts chapter 2, he didn't just stand up and scream at everyone, "Jesus is Lord." No, he reasoned, he explained, he connected the dots. And Paul, in Athens, Paul was talking every day in Athens for about 2 years, in lecture halls and marketplaces, wherever people were willing to listen. Imagine that. And when we talk about Paul talking for 2 years, we're basically saying he was the original TED Talk marathoner. People were willing to listen, and he was willing to speak. But here's the thing, apologetics in community isn't just about intellectual gymnastics. It is messy, it is human, and it is surprisingly funny sometimes. I remember a discussion group where I was talking to a bunch of people, and we were talking about the government and why there were so many potholes in the road. Somebody said, if God is also powerful, why do we still have potholes, something which is so very basic in a developing country? I laughed and everybody laughed, but soon we ended up talking about God. How God fills the human potholes that are there in our hearts. The potholes became a metaphor. And that is where I realized, you don't need to be inside a church to spread the gospel. God can even use a hole in the road to teach truth. And this means the learning from one another. We might have people who are brilliant at explaining the resurrection, and somebody else who has the patience to answer the 100th question about dinosaurs and Genesis. You combine forces and suddenly the gospel becomes alive. Not a lecture, not a bulletin, not a sermon, and not a meme, but alive. When we look at the making of an apologetics, I put in 4 very short points out there. But the way that I approach apologetics is through sound reason. I was debating a couple of Muslim folks back at SCE a couple months back. And when I understood finally that they were there simply to debate and not to reason logically, I walked off. They actually held a sign, a poster, a standee which said Jesus was a Muslim. And I said, you know what, I ought to be talking to them. And so I did. But when I soon realized that my talking to them has no impact on the way because they are not willing to learn and change, I said this is simply a waste of my time. And probably I would be standing there, but also I had my class in the next 10 minutes, so I left. Jesus says to love God with all your mind. So be curious, wonder about creation. Look at the stars, ask questions, even though as humans we may not have all the answers. I remember as a little kid, I would often gaze up to the moon. And I would say, Jesus, I know that you are the moon, but make me a cloud next to the moon so that I can illuminate with you. And this is sometimes the glimmer of hope that you need to give to people. Sometimes the only gospel that non-believers will ever read is your life, or you are the 5th gospel. When you do that, Jesus calls us to be humble. Brilliance without humility fails. Nancy Pearcey said, the greatest obstacle to the gospel is not the lack of answers, but failure to live them. God sometimes allows us to hit rock bottom because he is the rock at the bottom. And before we conclude, actually, yes, I want all of us to think about the cross. George MacLeod, founder of the Iona community, said, I simply argue that the cross be raised again at the center of the marketplace as well as on the steeple of the church. I am recovering the claim that Jesus was not crucified in a cathedral between 2 candles, but on a cross between 2 thieves, on the town garbage heap, at a crossroad of politics so cosmopolitan that they had to write his title in Hebrew and in Latin and in Greek, at the kind of place where cynics talk smut, and thieves curse and soldiers gamble. Because that is where he died, and that is what he died about, and that is where Christ's own ought to be, and that is what church people ought to be about. Apologetics, in the long run, gives us all the tools. Today was basically more of the terminologies, the way we can examine different challenges and how we can narrow them in apologetics. But community gives us the strength together as believers. Humility is going to keep us grounded, and courage moves us into the world so we can dare and ask questions, question the cross where people are hurting, confused, and are still searching for answers. Apologetics is a call for us to sit back and even introspect on our own faith, even before we speak to fellow believers or non-believers, growing them in faith. It gives us the chance so we can see for ourselves where we stand as believers. It is often the mirror to your own soul, so you can understand where your relationship with Christ lies. You cannot expect to build on the relationship that somebody else has with Christ if your relationship with Christ is weak. And this is where apologetics has helped me over the last few years. I read about a lot of different things online and how now AI is being brought into the world of Christianity. There are people who talk about ethics in AI, if AI is unethical, lots of different things. But then again, as Francis Thompson said, if God has pursued you relentlessly, if he has chased your heart down the labyrinth of life, then surely we can step into the marketplace with the same fearless love and unshakable truth. We need to raise the cross, live the faith, speak the truth, and watch the world notice. And notice, most importantly, not by our own answers, but by the way we live as believers. We have time for a little bit of a Q&A. If anybody has any questions, if anybody would like to share something, or if anybody wants to clarify something. I wanted to make this very simplistic today, simply so that, because we weren't discussing topics. Yes, Stephanie.
But then I realized, like, Matthew 28:18-20 says, therefore go and make disciples of all
Right.
nations. So if we don't, it's like it's a derivative of an action, right? So it sounds like the gospel is an action, right? And in order to keep something alive, in quotes,
Mhm.
you have to have action. So that's what I've heard. My question is, why do you think we need to, why the word alive?
Right, so the way I describe alive is something that has breath. I have this question, and if we have two wolves, one is in the light and he is chained, and one is in the darkness and he is chained, which one do you think lives?
Wait, say that again?
If there are two wolves, one is chained in the light and the other is chained in the darkness, which one do you think lives?
I hope the one in
No, the one you feed.
Oh.
So you constantly need to feed the gospel to yourself as well as to others. The gospel already has the breath of life. It is our purpose that we can take this breath of life and deliver it to fellow believers and non-believers. I think whenever back home I would have ministries, we would have cottage meetings. So we would go to the house of fellow believers. We would share the gospel every Sunday after church. We would pray for the people who were sick. We were spreading the gospel in a sense that we were bringing the hope alive as well. A lot of the gospel is about hope. And the reason that a lot of people do not read the gospel is because they think that it doesn't give them hope. People wander away from the gospel. As I said, when I would ask my own friends, why are you Christians? Because I hail from the northeastern part of India. We had it is a Christian state. The Seven Sisters, it is also called the Bible Belt of India. And most of the people, especially the tribals, were born Christians. And I would ask them, do you go to church? They would say, yes, sometimes with my parents. And they would say, I usually just go to Sunday school and that is it for me. And I would ask them, well, why are you Christian? And they would tell me, because my mom is Christian, because my dad is Christian. And I would say, why are your parents Christian? Because their parents are Christian. And the entire list goes on. But as I was growing up, because I was very new to the Christian faith, I come from a different background, I was able to see the gospel come alive in front of my own eyes. I was able to see the differences that were there with the worldview that I was actually living in and the worldview that Christianity actually follows. And as we closely evaluate Jesus and we look at him, the most perfect man to have ever lived, we will understand that the gospel is truly credible and it is marvelous in ways we cannot even imagine. So in that sense, we are called to spread the word of the gospel and keep it alive among the believers who say that they are Christians but probably do not live their faith.
Okay, so then the answer to my question is, the goal is to keep the gospel alive and not make it alive. Because we can't make it. It has already been made.
Well, it is passive, so our job is to plant the seed that brings about activity in their hearts.
So can we agree keep instead of make?
We can agree and keep. Well, any other questions, any other thoughts? Yes, John?
Well, thank you for a wonderful introduction to apologetics. The question, I guess, would be, because it takes a lot of time to understand all of this and a lot of study, so who would be our target audience and how could we present it to that audience? Because my last question is then what is the difference between evangelism and apologetic? Is because is apologetics just part of a toolbox, a tool in our toolbox of evangelism? So how do you see the differences or similarities?
Thanks, John. Yes, I think apologetics for me as I have used it, and I think as mostly we are called to do, it is a part of evangelism. I don't want us to wrestle with questions with somebody else when we know that it isn't going to be culminate in a very fruitful manner. Usually when you're debating with somebody else, you win or the other person wins, and one of you walks away with the spite and the jealousy that you didn't have your arguments or you were not ready or something like that. But apologetics is meant to be reasons to live your life. We are going to try to prove, for instance, we're going to try to prove how science walks with religion. Usually people say, and scientists say, that religion and science cannot go together because they're contradictory. Well, our Bible actually proves that religion goes with science, and we will look into that. So the sharing of the gospel, I do in a way that I have this knowledge at my disposal, and I carry it out to the fellow non-believers by reasoning with them, not asking questions. The way I do this is I ask them, how do you feel about this and what is taught to you about this? And I tell them that this is what is taught to be by Christianity and by Jesus. And they tell me, oh, this is so interesting and I want to learn more. And I have a few friends who are Muslims, and I talk to them about how things are very different. So I think it was probably last Eid when I was talking to one of them, and they were telling me about it because they too believe in Abraham and all of those things. And I was telling them, well, Abraham is there in my Bible also. And when we were talking about all of these things, Muslims also celebrate Eid. I think they have probably like 2 Eid events in 1 year or something like that. And the second one, which they actually celebrated last year, I was just reading about it, and it had to do with the sacrifice of Isaac. And there, when I was talking to them, hey, what do you guys actually do on Eid? He was telling me about how we commemorate the sacrifice and all of those things. And I flipped onto my Bible again, and I said, well, the story of Abraham and Isaac is there in the Bible. Let me go through it. And that is why even when Abraham is commanded by God to not sacrifice Isaac, he brings a ram, not a lamb. He brings a ram because the lamb is still yet to come, the lamb of the world who takes the sins away. And when I was reading about this actually moved me because it helped me understand that I not only asked this person what he believed in, I also learned why do they do things certainly in a certain manner, and it helped me most importantly grow in my own faith towards Jesus. So when we look at the Bible and when we evaluate it with different worldviews, with Buddhism, with Hinduism, with Islam, and with all of these different religions, as people keep on asking questions to us and as our ideologies collide, it is also a good way for us to understand that the Bible still holds credible. Because when we dive deeper into it, we will see that there is truth. And if somebody is pointing you to something, and if you are saying something else, either one of you is true. And you will see that all of the time, the Bible still and Jesus is true. So, sharing the gospel, as I do it, I usually talk to my friends in class. I ask them about what they believe. I spread the gospel. I have an Irish Croatian friend whom I was talking to, and I was asking about why he believes certain things. And the way you approach this is with a lot of patience. You cannot throw in questions and your answers and say that Jesus is the only truth to somebody else, because they're not going to meet you a second time. You need to take them out for coffee. You need to chat with them over dinner, over meals, and more so in just tiny interstices of space whenever you get the time.
You said something, Muslims celebrate Eid? What's Eid?
Eid. Muslims, that's
It's like a festival.
yes. Yes, after. Yes.
What is it about?
So, I'm not too sure either about what exactly they do on Eid, but then I think Eid was just last week also. Yeah. Yeah, and so, yes. Yeah. So because that's the story they relate with Eid.
So why do they care about Isaac? I'm confused.
Because that is also there in the Quran.
Oh, the father.
The father of the Messianic religions, yes.
Yeah, but the Muslims have met, they don't believe that Isaac was about to be sacrificed.
Right.
They believe it was Esau who was being
Yes.
sacrificed.
Yes. And
The
when
same thing that when you talk of Christ was died and was buried. They say, no, it was not Christ who died on the cross.
Yes.
It was Judas or somebody else, but Jesus was just taken to heaven.
Yes.
So it's very hard to reason with the people who believe like that.
Absolutely.
But you need prayer, and if you have a friend like that you want to share with, first of all, bet the whole thing in prayer, because it just confuses. It will add to confusion when he's trying to reach out to them.
Absolutely. Yes, Abhinav.
I think also of the fact that, just to add what John was asking, right? Like from your experience and from my experience, like from a very shared experience, and I think it's like the target audience actually is everybody in the room here today. And I say that because of the fact that when it comes to evangelism, it's about invitation, right? Like when we were non-believers, we were evangelized with or to, right? And that goes to the fact that you extend the good news to them. But I think apologetics is also the case, which is extremely important in our toolbox. It's kind of like having, the way I look at it, and also from this session, I think, because I always thought that it is totally okay to like believe in one thing, and which is Jesus, right? And it is like they say, to keep the main thing the main thing. But what happens when somebody who's also a Christian but who's wrestling with his or her faith enters the room with you and has a tough conversation? Like, what do you do in that case, right? Like, how do you reason with that person? And I think that's where apologetics could really help each and every one of us, because like Armaan was saying, and I also think this, that if evangelism is invitation, if evangelism is invitation, then apologetics is an explanation, right? Like you very carefully explain to that person that why you believe is the real thing, right? And also the fact that I think when as non-believers first, right, when we were hearing, it's always about sharing the good news, right, which is great. But then when, especially, and because seasoned Christians have already have their feet planted deep in Christ, and know the fact that, hey, what I believe in is the truth and the way and the life, and there's no other way, right? But this totally applies to the fact when folks are new to Christianity and they're trying to know who Jesus is, or why is Jesus the ultimate Lord. I think that's where apologetics can like really help each and every one of us, like drive that conversation, like, hey, this is why you should believe in, and this is the explanation behind it, right? So yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Yes.
Just correction, I said they believe Esau was the one being sacrificed. No, I meant to say Ishmael. That was the first son of Abraham.
Yes.
And that's the one they really believe in as the supposedly sacrificial guy who, of course, was delivered by God before he could be sacrificed.
The Muslims believe that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Why? Why?
Well,
how did that come about?
You know,
Did you just wake up and believe that? Or?
Many really believe that Ishmael is the founder of the nation of the Arab nations, and the people who believe like that, it's like they are opposed to the idea Isaac was the promised son. But they believe it was Ishmael, and Ishmael, they relate to him as being the founder of the Arabic people.
That is apologetics right in front of you. You don't need to go out the room. Yeah, you can. It is a good way for all of us to just ask each other also questions,
Yeah.
We learn through the conversations that we have with each other about different questions, about different doubts, and about different worldviews. And most importantly, about the Christian worldview, we believe that the Lord is the way, the truth, and the life, but why is it actually true? Or is it actually true? So apologetics, and it is a very broad topic. it is not as if we can study all of this in one day. But then if we take it topic by topic, I think it'll help us break down much more easily in a way that we can comprehend.
I think for me, one of the things that I don't know if it's like one of the things that I wrestle with or struggle with. I don't know which word is appropriate, but I hate that I'm referencing him again. But Wes Huff, when I listened to that 2-hour and 30-minute apologetic session with the Diary of CEO, I think his name is Stephen or Stephen, and I believe he's atheist based on the conversation. And he asked, so am I going to hell? And then he was like, so you, first he kind of made a joke about it, like people are gonna watch that and just only focus on that aspect of what Wes said, that you're going to hell if you don't believe in Jesus Christ. But he explained it really well, and he said that there is no good news without bad news. And he said everyone is going to hell. And if you just stop there, then there's no good news, right? And people can just take that one expert and then, oh my God, like he said everyone is going to, what about the people who believe? But you have to kind of listen to the whole sentence or the whole defense. And he said that, how did he say? He said that God is, I forgot how he said it, that God is not, that he gives you the will to choose hell because he's not there. That's not exactly how he said it, but I'm paraphrasing. Mm-hmm. But if you want to be with him, then you will be with him. So that's like of course, like, that's like this, like, at the heart of the gospel. But it's like the way he explained it, right? Versus like, if you, like, I can quote John 3 verse 16. And that may not mean anything to anyone. But it was just like the explanation that kind of like made me like, oh, what explanations do I have? Or how could I, it's like teaching someone that you have high blood pressure. That's very hard to, like, they're like, I don't feel the pressure. Right. Well, you don't have to feel the pressure to know that you have high blood pressure. It takes time to, like, over time. But it's like, it's the explanation, right, that helps the person to understand that, oh, these are the reasons why I have high blood pressure. I don't know, I'm just kind of using an analogy to say that it kind of enlightened me to, like, what explanations could I have to share when people ask, why do you believe in John 3:16? I mean, the whole entire chapter 3 of John is very fascinating. But I don't know. It's not a question. Was it a question? I don't know. But I don't know if you get what I guess, like, just hearing those words, like, okay, so the point I was trying to make was, I think in evangelism, and the only reason why I feel this way is because I've experienced it. So when I was in college, I had the opportunity to go evangelize in a part of the world where the Bible is not read in public. Like, you'll go to prison or you might die. And that was very hard for me to experience because I'm like, well, why would anyone do that? But it's like when you go on campus and you ask students about who they think Christ is, or like what do they understand about the Christian story and things like that, it's like wild in my imagination of what people actually think versus what actually takes place in the Bible. So I think that as a Christian, I'm challenged to share the gospel, the good news, but also to share the bad news, because without the bad news, we don't have the good news. And I think sometimes we forget to share both, that people have to, it's hard to hear, like, why would any loving God want me to be in a place like hell? Like, who created hell? Like, what is hell? So I will stop because I've talked for like more than 5 minutes.
I think that's pretty valid, and especially when we compare the different worldviews. Whenever I make these next notes, again, whenever we have a next session, I there is a series of checklists that are there. If a worldview stands firm in all of those checklists, and I think there were 9 or 12 of them, 9 or 12 questions that every worldview answers in a very different way, and whether it holds true, sustainable, and credible throughout all of the answers that it has through those checklists. Well, I think about that, and yes, we will be talking about it as well. And as for the matter of fact, yes, when I'm evangelizing also, when I'm just talking to my friends, evangelism doesn't need to be done in a very formal manner again. When I'm just talking to my friends, they don't really know the reason why they are believing what they are believing. And this is what apologetics is all about, understanding why you believe what you believe. Evangelism is believing, but apologetics is why are you believing. So I think it ties it down very well, because when you're sharing the gospel to somebody, you're telling them about the gospel. But when they in turn ask you questions about why is this the only way? Why is Jesus the only truth? Why are we only born males and females? Why can I not identify as red color? You will give them these answers, and these answers is what apologetics is all about.
Yeah, I think that, we need both.
Absolutely.
I think one, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think one of the things which, sometimes, because of the fact that at the end of the day we are humans, right, and we, curiosity fuels us, right? Even as little kids, we've always looked up to our parents and asked, like, why do the stars twinkle? And I think, at least, I say this, but curiosity lives in me still, and I'm like super curious about the fact that sometimes I would go on and research and think about, like, why, what does science say about, like, the crucifixion, right? Is that a real event or not? Like, things like that. And I've tried to read through a lot of this in the past, and one supporting fact which really amazes me is, during the time when Christianity was still gaining ground, disciples were, still proclaiming the good news, and they were being persecuted, to death, right? And nobody in their sane mind, like, if you believed in something which is not real, would go to the limits of putting their lives on the line, right? If it was, and forget about, even if it was real, people would still be reluctant. But just for early disciples and all the folks who were, like, persecuted because of the fact that they were flogged and to the highest degree which you can imagine, right? It would not make sense for somebody to stand up if it was not the whole truth, and not just even a part, but the whole truth, right? So I think that's where, like, I'd be really interested in, like, diving deep into, like, how science and apologetics and our I wouldn't say religion, but more of our relationship with the Lord establishes a grounding path going forward. Because I think, history is, if anything, in support of Christianity when we look at events like these, where persecution has happened, and the events which during the time when Christ was on the cross, there are multiple reports, some confirmed, some unconfirmed, that there was actually an eclipse when it was dark. I think all of those facts really supports what we're trying to learn here today. So
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for that. And yes, well, last year when I was still back home.
Can you explain to me later why stars twinkle?
Well, yeah, I think that is because of diffraction of rays. Yes.
Oh, I didn't know those answers.
Yes. So,
That's great.
so when I was back home last year, we had this service, the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, from a scientific, medical, and religious perspective. So I was there, and one of the fellow believers was there, and we actually had this service in the church where people were asking us questions from the audience, and we were answering the questions with both science, medicine, and faith with the Bible. And it was a great time where people were asking questions about how Jesus didn't already die because of all of those things. What were the fluids that were oozing out of his body, the pericardial effusion, the different sorts of spinal fluids, all of those different things. And as we lead up, especially towards Good Friday and Easter, I think it would be probably an apt next topic if we would want to discuss that. But sure, if anybody has any other suggestions, yes, more than free to incorporate those ideas.
I think my suggestion would be to maybe read the Gospels
Mhm.
and understand the Gospels, because from what I've heard today, it's central to apologetics.
Absolutely.
If you don't have the belief of where the faith is from,
Mhm.
then you cannot defend and answer the right question. So I think we have to kind of do both.
Right. We have to do both. Yes. So well, with this, we'll wrap it up for today. But then, yes, if we have any other questions, any suggestions, we'll be free to just talk to me or talk to one another. And God bless all of us as He leads us and uses us for His ministry, especially during these crucial times of Christianity, and especially as we lead up to Palm Sunday, which is tomorrow. Amen.